This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
This paper attempts to interpret and discuss James 1 verses 22 to 27, a passage that consists of only a few sentences but carries a strong and influential meaning. Also, the meaning of the passage is not communicated directly. Instead, it is disguised behind allegories and thus requires a proper and careful interpretation. Many scholars have worked on translating this passage, and therefore, it currently has several different versions. In this paper, the discussion of the passage is based on several perceptions. First of all, I will read and interpret its New Revised Standard Version, NRSV, independently, formulating my idea of its meaning. Secondly, I will locate and read several scholarly sources that would cover the aspects of the passage concerning which I have questions, and I will present the interpretation provided by the authors. James 1 verses 22 to 27 is a persuasive message that intends to clarify to the audience the true meaning of being Christian and provide the necessary instruction as to the ethics to which religious individuals ought to adhere. James 1 verses 22 to 27, NRSV, Individual Interpretation. James 1 verses 22 to 27 is a passage that pursues one clear purpose: to persuade the readers to adjust their perceptions of their religion as a set of instructions and not merely a text on the paper. The passage begins with the following sentence: "But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers who deceive themselves." This remark of James signifies that he is attempting to convince his audience to behave in a certain way. The further key of the passage remains unchanged. The author persists with his intention to teach the readers to adopt a set of beliefs according to which they would structure their actions. James wants his readers to become the doers of the word and not only the passive hearers. To make his message even more convincing, James employs an allegory and compares the passive hearers with the individuals in front of a mirror who look at themselves and, on going away, immediately forget what they were like. Using this comparison, James seems to attempt to illustrate how unreasonable such behavior is and how pointless it is for one to learn something important and then never use it in practice. The next sentence of the passage demonstrates that James is willing to encourage his readers to follow his instructions by telling them that doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing. The last two sentences of the passage represent a more direct message as James moves on from the analogy to the straightforward teaching. The last two sentences are explanatory. James says, "If any think they are religious and do not bridle their tongues but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless." In this sentence, instead of using vague words such as hearers of the word and doers of the word, James specified that he is talking particularly about the religious teachings and wisdom and explains that they are to be perceived as the recommendations as to the future actions of the listeners but not as empty words. James informs his readers that those who treat religious teachings as merely words and fail to act on them risk undermining their religiousness, as the wisdom of religion is worthless when it does not have a practical reflection. Finally, in the concluding sentence of the passage, James provides a very clear explanation of the requirements of Christianity from its followers, saying, "Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world." Interpretation of James 1 verses 22 to 27 using the opinions in the scholarly articles. In their articles, the scholars notice James' strong rhetorical skills that enhance the effectiveness of the message he is passing to the audience, using memorable words and analogies. In his article, Whartenby comments on the last sentence of James 1 verses 22 to 27, pointing out the fact that James' perception of God resembled that of Jesus. That author notices that James referred to God as Father, which implies that there is love and care between God and the believers. Besides, Whartenby mentions that James' thought seems to move forward using catchwords rather than strict logic. With this comment, the author shows his admiration for the style that James has chosen to address his audience. In other words, as a speaker and a writer, James possesses some unique and powerful skills that make his rhetoric more persuasive and effective. Also, Whartenby's comment notes that James must have had quite a deep knowledge of his audience to be able to use the persuasion techniques that would leave the strongest impression. Boyce remarks on the analogy employed by James, saying that to make the point, James now resorts to another unique but powerful image, the image of the mirror. The scholar notices the potential of the allegory used by the speaker. Commenting on the passage, Boyce compares its style with that used by Paul in Corinthians 13:12, where the mirror symbolizes a partial reflection of reality, emphasizing the difference between the real world and the dim reflection. Paul's aptness to use analogies is also noticeable in his letter to the Galatians when he says, "As long as an heir is underage, he is no different from a slave," comparing an heir before and after inheriting his father's power to a believer before and after accepting and understanding Christianity. Comparing the two styles of James and Paul and their use of analogies, Boyce points out how powerful this technique is in terms of the impact on the audience and how versatile the use of one symbol or analogy may be depending on the context in which the speaker decides to present it. Conclusion: interpretation after learning the perspectives of the scholars. Having read the articles and the views of the scholars concerning the passage, I started to notice an aspect that remained hidden earlier. The uniqueness of James' analogy is its double meaning and effect. Namely, saying that the listeners and readers should not be passive hearers but should act on the word refers both to the teachings of the Bible and to the passage by James. His analogy and his main point are focused on the persuasion of the audience to use whatever they learn from their religion in practice. However, James' words also qualify as one of the instructions that the listeners are to act on. That way, the analogy obtains a circular nature, becoming even more effective. Did you like this James 1 verses 22 to 27 passage interpretation sample? To get more works like this one, make sure to check out the database of academic paper examples at ivpanda.com. You will find thousands of samples for all your study needs.